everybody, it's your old pal Mike. I hope you're happy, healthy, and safe, and welcome back to the channel, because today I'm gonna walk you through one of my favorite modifications for vintage style Fender Jaguars and Bass 6s, specifically those set up to work with a mastery bridge. Now, you know, I love the mastery bridge. It is one of many options, but it happens to be the option that I choose. And to be sure, there are plenty of others out there for those of you who have different needs as a player. However, if you're like me and you like what the mastery does tonally, and you're used to having them on all of your offsets, well, when it comes to Jaguars, there is a problem. And that problem is the mute plate. In its unmodified form, the Fender Mute plate bridge holes are simply too small to allow the mastery's oversized posts to pass through, and that's why we're here today. If you're like me and you want to retain either the functionality or just the look of the Fender Mute plate, you're in luck. So what is the Fender Mute? Well, the Fender Mute is essentially a spring-loaded plate that pivots back and forth and allows you to push a piece of foam on the front edge into the path of the strings, thus deadening their sustain. The Mute is mounted to the body via two screws located beneath the bridge base, which allow you to adjust both the height of the Mute plate as well as how it pivots, which is essential for fine-tuning the way the Mute engages. It produces a sound not entirely unlike a banjo or a palm-muted guitar. However, it does hit all 6 strings at the same time and consistently at that, and in doing so, completely frees up your right hand. You don't have to anchor at the bridge to get those staccato notes. You can strum full force with your whole arm. You can pluck certain strings, you can pluck full chords. It really is a fantastic invention and comes in handy on Jaguars and Bass 6s, which are the two models which most often included the Mute as part of their hardware complement. All in all, it's a rather simple machine that can have some really big tonal consequences. However, it's also a rather mystifying component of the design. So we're gonna get into installing, but we're also gonna talk about Mute setup and how to make sure it doesn't push your strings out of tune when you engage it. Now, there's one thing that I have to do before I do anything to the guitar, and that is drill out the post holes on the Fender Mute plate, and I've already done that. Say action.
Action.
Action. In fact, yesterday I was down at Mike and Mike's Guitar Bar using their drill press to widen these holes. I bought a special stepped drill bit just for the task. Now, on the stock Mute plate, the holes for the bridge posts are rather long and thin, sort of oblong, and I needed to widen them to 3/8 of an inch using this stepped drill bit. You can see that they're not perfectly centered, but that's okay, because we're gonna want these holes to be sort of oval shaped so that the Mute plate can pivot around the wide mastery posts. And because I've already done that, I can move on to step 2, which is taking string tension off of my Jag. Now, on a normal Fender Jaguar with the stock bridge, it would probably help to just remove the strings entirely, because you're gonna have to be lifting the bridge completely off the body in order to access the plunger and the mounting screw locations beneath the bridge. However, one of my favorite things about the mastery that a lot of people seem to forget when they're doing tech work on offsets is that the post screws are meant to be removable. And that helps the bridge be seated correctly when you've installed it in a guitar. It allows you to kind of lock it in, but it also allows you to just slide the bridge base off of the guitar instead of having to remove the posts as well. So I find this to be such a boon for working on guitars like this. It really does save a lot of time. Now, while I have the bridge base off, I want to show you, this is the plunger that I was talking about earlier, the spring-loaded component in the Mute that allows it to pivot back and forth. The plunger is just held in there by tension. And in fact, when there's no tension on it, it usually is snug enough to just keep the plunger in place. So I actually have had this installed here for a long time without the Mute installed, but we're gonna change that today. Now, the next step in the procedure is to put the Mute plate on the body and just check fit around the mastery posts. And it might, in fact, help to install those mounting screws. But now that I'm doing this, I can see that I'm gonna wanna keep shaping these holes with a file. And the reason for that is that, yes, I do want them to be oversized so that the mute plate functions the way I want it to, but once these holes are drilled out, they may not be on center, and when they're not on center, that means that they can actually grip the mastery posts and pull the bridge out of the body. And that's not something I want. I want the mastery to be stable and in place, which is the way that it functions best. So I am going to, I'm gonna remove material from the back edge, and I'm also gonna remove material on the sides here so that I can make sure this fit is correct, because I can see that it's leaning to one side. It seems like the mute plate is shifted just a bit toward the base. So removing a little material here and a little material here should do the trick. I'm gonna move my guitar aside, and I'm just gonna start filing. Now, sometimes I like to file with the plate instead of the file itself, which I feel allows me to really focus on one edge. If there's like a sharp bit here, I can just round that off a lot easier. Let's check fit again, now that we've done that. Ooh, working up a sweat. That feels pretty good. Now my holes are a lot bigger than they need to be, but I'm actually totally comfortable with that. So I think we're about ready to move on. And the good news is that if your holes don't look absolutely consistent and perfect, that's okay, because they're just gonna be covered by the bridge anyway. You will never see them. The next thing I'm going to do is reinstall this little screw that goes through the center of the mute plate. And it really is just as crude as a screw sticking through the plate and pivoting back and forth on a spring-loaded plunger. There really isn't any special engineering to it. We're gonna put the mute in its place. All right, and I am just screwing these mounting screws directly into the body. And you can see here just how the mute plate works. It really is just gliding back and forth on that spring-loaded plunger. Nothing too fancy. So now I am just gonna see how low I can get this. Too low. We do want it to flip back and forth, and that seems about right. Now the mute is installed, but you may have already noticed a problem, and that is the mounting screws for the mute are necessarily taller than the mounting posts of the mastery, and that is not going to work. So what we're gonna have to do is add a little bit more pitch back on the neck to thus raise the mastery bridge so that it's over these posts, allowing the mute to go up and down while maintaining comfortable playing action. So what are we gonna have to do? We're gonna have to take the neck off, check what shim is in there, and add a little bit more. Not too much, but just enough to get the mastery posts above these mounting screws for the mute. Shouldn't be too difficult. 0.5 it is. I could add another 0.25 and get this up to 0.75 degrees of pitch back, and that might actually do the trick. Let me just install this and see where we are. And if I have to use two shims, I have to use two shims. No big deal. Every guitar, of course, is different. But if I can, I'd like to keep my bridge a little bit lower if possible. Mastery bridges, if you don't know, are designed to sit lower in the body than the stock bridge. Usually I aim for, 3 or 4 millimeters off the top of the pick guard. Seems to be about the happy spot for most mastery bridges. All right, now we got a mute plate that functions and a mastery that is perfectly comfortable to play. All right, that's actually feeling really good. That's right about where I would normally have it anyway. And as you can see, the mastery is sitting just above the mute plate mounting screws, so we are in good shape. And in fact, it looks like I've got a little extra space to come down on the treble side, so that is a win for me. Now, we've already been at this for a while, but we're not done quite yet. In fact, we haven't even installed the mute foam yet, which is an absurdly crucial component to this whole thing working. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna look at it, we're gonna eye it up and see where the foam looks centered under the strings. We're just gonna disengage it and slide it under here. Line it up so that it's centered underneath the strings. And we're just gonna press down. Now that we've put the foam on, we need to make sure that it's making the proper amount of contact with the strings. That is, enough contact so that it's stopping sustain from happening, but not so much contact, so much force, that it's physically pushing the strings sharp. A little bit. But actually, that's a pretty good amount of mute. It does actually pull sharp a little bit, and that's not the end of the world because there's no sustain. The note is there and then gone so quick that in a band context you might not even notice that it's pulling sharp. However, I am going to aim for a more perfect union between mute and guitar. Now, there are two causes. Hi everybody. There are two main causes for the mute pulling a guitar out of tune. And number one, that is just the amount of force with which the mute is hitting the bottom of the strings. And number two is that the mute is making contact with the strings ahead of the point of intonation. You can see that right here. The saddles are back here, the strings are being touched here, and with brand new, very hard foam, that can definitely pull your guitar a little bit sharp. However, the foam will wear in over time, that's normal, and so you may actually find that problem kind of taking care of itself. Now that the strobe tuner is plugged in, let's see how sharp that's pulling. So let's go for the low E. You can see that's a little flat and falling, so we're gonna tune it up. Engage the mute. It's considerable. Pretty close though. All right, so we're gonna take the mastery off and tighten those mounting screws a little bit more because it seems like it's pulling extra sharp now. Now this process would be the exact same thing I would do for a guitar that was wearing the stock bridge. So don't worry about technique. It's not all that different from mastery or stock. If you've got a mute, this is the same kind of process I would be following. And we are going to tighten these just a little bit, about a turn. And hopefully that will allow it to continue working. Yeah, that should make just fine contact on there. That seems pretty well in tune. Let's engage the mute and see what goes on. Very little, that's very good. Not too bad. Not too bad. It's pulling a little bit sharp, but in a way that I think I can live with. Now let's hear what that mute sounds like. When set up correctly, the Jaguar Mute can kind of do that rubber bridge thing that is so wildly popular these days. It's not exactly the same, but that's its strength. With the rubber bridge guitars, they sound like that 24/7. There's no switching off to a more traditional guitar sound. With the Jaguar, the Mute can be disengaged at a moment's notice, allowing for some really interesting textures on top of the usual full-throated growl of a great short-scale Fender. I will say that with the Mute engaged, I had to think a little more intentionally about how I was playing. You can see that I still have my hand anchored to the bridge because, well, that's where I normally play. It took a while until I got more comfortable with these dead strings and that I was able to play with the sounds available by plucking closer to the neck. As for intonation, yes, it does pull slightly sharp, and try as I may, I couldn't quite dial that out on this guitar. I do find that with heavier strings, things are a lot better. Here I'm using 12 to 54, which is my favorite 24-inch Fender gauge, and those held up a lot better than any lighter sets I tried. But the thing about those aforementioned rubber bridge guitars, intonation isn't always perfect, and that's part of the charm, that's part of the sound. If you're using a Jag to get these sounds, then it's okay and very human for there to be a little bit of inconsistency in tuning here and there. I say embrace it. Special shout out to my supporters on Patreon, especially Andrew, who has been patiently waiting for this video for like a decade. So Andrew, this one's for you. As always, thank you so much for watching. I do hope that this was beneficial to those of you who are looking to get into the rubber bridge or the Jaguar Mute thing. Let me know if it was helpful. I will see you in the next video, but before I go, I want to say, I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I hope you're having fun with guitars.